A statement of the obvious to establish a benchmark. All corruption in politics is bad. If you are any kind of public official and/or possess any kind of responsibility for disbursing the taxes of your fellow citizens, it should go without saying that you must do so honestly and transparently, and that your decisions about what or who the money gets spent on are not influenced by any extracurricular largesse, whether it be a retainer for dubious consultancy work, inflated fees for after-dinner speeches, free tickets to the football, or an envelope stuffed with used 20s. But while all political corruption is bad, some of it is, if not forgivable, then understandable. If you are a relatively lowly functionary of whichever government employs you, you're probably not making much money, but probably under very little scrutiny. Motive and opportunity will always loom and tempt. At the level of head of a national government, however, political corruption is, when you think about it, just bizarre. If you are the head of a national government, even of a relatively small country, you're probably reasonably well looked after. The money might not be spectacular while in office, but your living expenses are probably substantially taken care of, and once you've served your term, your prospects out of it are usually pretty rosy. Very few former prime ministers or presidents end up hunkered in a railway arch selling broken pencils from a tin cup, even if quite a few deserve to. Also, because you're head of a national government, people generally pay attention to what you do, which means that if you are on the fiddle, you're much likelier to get rumbled. One recalls, as one so often does in such circumstances, former Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak. A few years back, inquiring police raided his various homes and recovered the equivalent of about 25 million euros in cash in 26 currencies, 12,000 items of jewellery, 423 watches and 567 handbags, altogether worth north of 200 million euros, to say nothing of the 670 million or so which had somehow found its way into his bank account. Razak is currently supping the gruel of Kajang prison in Selangor state and whining that he should be allowed to serve his time under house arrest. What remains bewilderingly unclear is how, in the wide world of sports, he expected to get away with it.
Former Prime Minister of Mauritius Pravind Jugnauth was released on bail by a court in the national capital after he was arrested in a money laundering probe.
At which to the less spectacular, if nevertheless curious case of Pravind Jugnauth, until last November Prime Minister of Mauritius. He was arrested this past weekend after the country's Financial Crimes Commission indicted him on charges of money laundering. The FCC raided 10 locations, including Jugnauth's home, from which they claim to have recovered several suitcases full of banknotes in a variety of currencies, a bit over 2 million euros worth, and 7 posh watches, 5 by Cartier. Jugnauth has been freed on bail and is furiously denying everything. He has had a lousy few months. At Mauritius's general election in November, the coalition he led, Alliance Le Pep, was not merely beaten, but obliterated. Before that election, Jugnauth's coalition held 42 of the 66 seats in Mauritius's parliament. Once the votes were counted, it had 2. Voters were unimpressed by leaked phone recordings implicating various officials in assorted malfeasance, and even less impressed when Jugnauth's government briefly yanked the plugs on social media to staunch their spread. The latest developments have prompted considerable to-do on Mauritius. Jugnauth is not merely a former Prime Minister from 2017 to 2024, but sort of Mauritian royalty. Pravind Jugnauth's father, Sir Anirudh Jugnauth, immediately preceded him as Prime Minister and had earlier served nearly a decade as President. Sir Anirudh also had a tendency to permit power to go to his head. In 1992, during a previous stint as Prime Minister, he attempted to give his wife, Lady Sarojini Jugnauth, the doubtless heartfelt but sensationally grandiose birthday present of putting her face on Mauritius's 20 rupee note. The gesture was withdrawn amid general and commendable public incredulity. Whether or not Pravind Jugnauth is guilty is now a matter for the Mauritian courts, though if the sacks of cash and fancy timepieces are indeed his, they will be difficult to reconcile with the modest salary of a Mauritian public servant. However, this is all not merely terrifically awkward for Jugnauth, but possibly for the United Kingdom. Last October, in what Jugnauth must have believed was not merely an election-clinching diplomatic triumph, but the kind of thing that gets your face on the banknotes from which your mum was cruelly denied, he shook hands on a deal under which the UK would return to Mauritian sovereignty the long-contested Chagos Islands and pay Mauritius 90 million quid a year to maintain the lease on Diego Garcia, the largest Chagos island, home to a huge and strategically vital British-American military facility. Mauritius's new Prime Minister, Navin Ramgoolam, though he is not that new, having had 2 previous goes at it, is seeking to reopen the Chagos Islands deal, believing it a poor one. The new administration of the United States has also been critical, and Ramgoolam wants America at the table if and when fresh talks take place. There is, as of this recording, no suggestion of a link between the extant Chagos deal and the loot retrieved from the former Prime Minister's home. But if renewed negotiations become at all testy, you can be pretty confident someone will suggest it. For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Miller.